Okay, so welcome again, everybody. My name is Kellyanne Perry and I'm the Practice Improvement Lead for Walsall Safeguarding Partnership. And this presentation today has been organised and will be hosted by Walsall as part of a series of webinars that are being put together and rolled out to practitioners as part of the West Midlands Regional Adult Safeguarding League. And today this session is on doorstep crime and scams. So let me just talk you through the structure of today so you know who we have with us and how the session will work. So we're here for the next 2 hours and we do have several speakers with us today. First of all, we have Catherine Hart, who is a Chartered Trading Standards Institute Lead Officer for Doorstep Crime. She's been a Trading Standards Officer for over 20 years and she now lives in Scotland. She's also the lead officer role has kept her really busy and on her toes over the last 18 months with the amount of scams incidents and doorstep callers. And she describes that as never being a dull moment. You may have already heard or seen Catherine speak, as I'm aware that she's a regular on both TV and radio talking about doorstep crime and scams. We also have with us today Sam Barnett, who is from Walsall Trading, is a Walsall Trading Standards Officer at Walsall Council. She's been in the role for 17 years, having started off dealing predominantly with advised cases. She now works mainly on criminal cases, and the majority of which are around fair training complaints such as rogue traders, counterfeiting, underage sales, misleading actions and claims, and Sam will be sharing with us a little bit later one of those experiences of the cases that she's worked on. We then have Jerry Wintrip, who is a retired West Midlands police officer, having retired in 2012, and the last 8 to 9 years of his service they were spent investigating doorstep crime and distraction burglary. And on retirement, he was appointed as an enforcement officer with Dudley Trading Standards, where he's responsible for investigating doorstep crime across the borough. And last but not least, we have Adam Carter, who is a senior project officer for the National Trading Standards Scams team, and he plays a key part in the customer education side of the team, along with investigations into the perpetrators behind mail and telephone scams. Adam has recently completed a project looking into the effects on customer wellbeing with doorstep victims and doorstep CCTV systems, and he'll be sharing some of that with us a little bit later on, along with how everyone can get involved with Friends Against Scams campaign. And then we have with us Sarah Neal from Walsall Safeguarding Partnership, who is controlling the presentation for us today. So it's lovely to have so many people with us from lots of different organisations. And just before I hand over to Catherine, let me just run through some of the technicalities with you. So although we're not able to see or hear any of you, there is the opportunity during the presentations for you to ask questions using the Q&A function, which you've just used to say hello. So if you do have any questions, please ask in that function and we will be monitoring them. And towards the end of the session, we do have a Q&A session where we will hopefully be answering some of these questions for you. So the webinar today is going to be recorded, and so we'll share the link afterwards with you all so that you can share with colleagues that haven't been able to attend. And the recording will also go on Walsall Safeguarding Partnership website as well. And at the end of the session, we will also be sharing a link in the chat in the Q&A function to an evaluation, which we can ask you all just to take a few minutes out of your time just to complete for us. We would be most grateful. So that's it from me. I'll join you again at the end in the Q&A session and just to say thank you. So without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to our first speaker today, who's Catherine Hart.
Good morning. Thanks very much for that. As said, I'm the lead officer for CTSI. It's been a very strange few months, I've got to say, because on top of my day-to-day job and everything else that's going on, I've also had an influx of scams and doorstep crime incidents across the country to try and to get out nationally, to make people aware what's going on. But at the same time, I'm also trying to promote good practice. So I'm delighted to see things like Friends Against Scams here today, because the work that they do is absolutely invaluable and certainly helps enhance the messages that I'm trying to put out from CTSI. So first of all, I do apologise. It's very difficult sometimes when you're doing a presentation like this to know which level to pitch it at. So I really don't know my audience at the moment. Normally I would know where everybody was and what your understanding is of doorstep crime. So for some people this might be very, very basic. For some people I might be putting technical words in, or things that you don't understand. Please, I really apologise, but anything you don't understand, please put a question to me at any time. Certainly after the presentation I'll try and get back to you. So what I try to, goodness me, I've already messed up and I clicked on the wrong thing on my own computer then, technology for you. So first of all, thanks very much for passing it on to the next slide. Yes, so really what I wanted to cover today is basically what is doorstep crime, what are the scams, how to identify it, what's happening on a national picture, what does it tell us, who does it affect, how does it affect vulnerable people? Also, what is vulnerable people? Who are the vulnerable people? And how we can all work together. And also just to give it a fleeting example of some of the doorstep crimes and scams that are out there. I mean, the list is endless. And also the implications that the last 18 months has had on us. Can we go to the next slide, please? So doorstep crime, crikey, comes in so many guises. There is no legal definition of doorstep crime. There's no legal definition of a scam. I actually don't particularly like the word scam because I don't think it gives the impact of the actual crime that's been committed. So, but doorstep crime comes in so many different guises. It's anything from knock on the door, you know, from somebody that sort of appears and says, you know, they're just in the area for today and it's just a fantastic deal. And if you walk away from this deal today, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Also the knock on the door where you've got somebody that actually says, we've got a problem with your roof. In fact, if you don't get it repaired, it'll affect your insurance, and if the slate lands on somebody's head, that's manslaughter, possibly murder if we've just telling you about it. We've found incidents where people have arrived home to find the garden half dug up, you know, and then they start trying to charge you for clipping the trees or the gardening or disposal of stuff. But then you've also got the other things that are happening, the telephone scams, your online scams, the romance scams, the mass marketing scams, the things that could arrive through the door, the unsolicited goods. Now, all of those things are designed to financially exploit us, take the money out of our pockets and fund a criminal lifestyle. And this is why I'll always say that all of these scams, all of these things are actually fraud. They are financial exploitation where somebody else is benefiting from our loss. And not only that, they are trying their best to deceive us one way or another. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So doorstep crime and scams, this is why, you know, some people like to sort of separate them. I want to put them together because they are all criminal offences. They are all financial exploitation. So basically, you know, I put them together and said, a victim responds to a call from any medium. So that might be the knock on the door, or it might be the telephone, or it might be a text. A lot of the time they respond to that, or they pick the phone up, or they respond in one way or another, and they're added to a suckers list. But it also could be that you've actually voluntarily added yourself to a marketing list. This is why we've got to be very, very careful these days of how we are passing on our own personal details. A lot of the time we do it with consent and we're not really aware of what actually happens with all of that. So then what happens, it goes onto a suckers list or a marketing list or whatever you want to call it. And quite often we are then receiving special offers. we are groomed, we are targeted in such a way that, you know, people will see that perhaps we're lonely, we're looking for puppies, we're looking for this, that and the other because we're putting it on social media. So all of these specific things are targeted at us. Then we receive the telephone calls, the mailing, the knocks on the door, all of these things. And like any awful situation, quite often if you're into this cycle, because it is a cycle of abuse, it only stops if you can stand up and say no, because you're actually suddenly aware of the fact that you're a victim or a potential victim, or the victim dies, or they run out of money, or somebody else intervenes. And that's why it's really important that we speak about this, and we speak about this regularly. If we go on to the next slide, please. I've just put this picture up because this is actually somebody that I came across, it was quite a few years ago now. Her name was Ellie, and what she was receiving 30 items of mail a day. Bags and bags of mail were found in her house. She was quite elderly. She was buying things like all these cakes, tooth whitening cream, anti-wrinkle cream. She was spending an absolute fortune. But these are pre-COVID days. I mean, I'm not saying that things have changed with that aspect, but there used to be a massive problem with mass marketing mail. It's still a problem. It's not as a problem as it was now, because we're now looking at more texts. We're now looking at sort of a different MO during the last 18 months since COVID. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So I know that we're going to have a look at some really good case studies, but I just wanted to sort of give a general overview of the sort of scams that I've seen and I've received myself. You know, there's one lady that she was sat at the door, and there's a knock on the door, and these guys are saying, we were doing the roof next door, and we discovered that there's all these there's an influx of bugs in your woodwork, and it's really, you're going to have all your trusses replaced. I mean, she wasn't even aware that there was a problem, and they brought down all these maggots in a jar for her to look at. And I mean, she didn't know, obviously she didn't know. She thought that was some sort of infestation, and ended up getting ripped off by thousands and thousands of pounds. But this was a particular MO by a serious and organised crime group that were doing the rounds at the time. Another lady came home to find workmen that had dug up a drive because they'd knocked on the door. She was at work. Her 14-year-old son answered the door and went, aye, carry on. You know, basically he hadn't a clue. They gave him the chat to say, your mum's given us, told us that we can do this. And he just let them on. You know, a 14-year-old teenager that probably wasn't really, you know, possibly wasn't even up at the time, you know, or certainly wasn't compos mentis. So, you know, that we have all those sort of incidents happening. An awful situation I found, it was actually working with social work. And a lady who hadn't been out of the house for, it must have been about 5 years, got targeted by somebody on Skype. It wasn't Skype visual, so she never actually physically saw this guy. It was all Skype audio, and she just fell in love with this person that she'd never met. And it was the psychological effect of this lady who was passing on money to him with this promise that he loved her, never met, never seen each other. But it's so difficult. It's so difficult. And the lasting impact that has on that lady still to this day, 6 years on, is horrific. Very lonely lady, very lonely, and very vulnerable. And again, the sort of things where somebody replies to one piece of mail, and then it escalates very quickly. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So the things to look out for, if you're out day to day and you hear about people sort of talking about things, or you go into somebody's house, you might see sort of masses of stacks of mail. You might see sort of them answering text. They might be glued to their computer screen or their text screen. But there's also other things that you might just hear. The things like money transfers, very, very common, still very common, particularly to the scammers. So we have things like using iTunes and gift cards and that sort of thing, but there's still a lot of this sort of Western Union transfers, very, very common for sort of romance scams. People might talk about sort of, you know, money transfers or big deposits. It's actually sometimes just listening to what people are doing. They might just sort of mention it in passing comment, oh, I've just had to go to the post office because I'm having to do this. But these are the things that we all need to look out for and need to, you know, just ask the question from time to time. From social work, when I was working with social work, sometimes you see bank statements lying around, or somebody might actually talk about, you know, the signing up for standing orders or direct debits. So they might actually want to have a look at the statements. I've heard of things like people saying that Mum, I'm okay now. I don't receive as many text messages or telephone calls anymore because I've just signed up to a really good call blocking program, which you pay £40 a month. You know, the alarm bells ring at that point because the alarm bells are ringing at this point because, you know, at the end of the day, these things should be free or at least a very, very low cost. We also have sort of mention of roofing work, gardening work. They're talking about that. Somebody come to the door, ask questions. Bogus officials still going around. You know, these are the sort of you know, MOs of these fly-by-night people that will do that. They will chance their mitts. Also, when you're sitting down with a client, quite often they sort of mention about the number of charities they're supporting. Now, it's great. It's amazing that charities do such a really good job. However, what we do find is a lot of people, and particularly elderly people, will sign up to so many charities with the direct debits that actually they're paying more in the direct debits and standing orders to the charities than they actually have in their own bank account. And as I mentioned, the things about iTunes, gift cards and that sort of thing, we have a lot of issues with that one. So yeah, lots of signs to look out for. You know, the welfare issues, sometimes that people will actually compromise on their own, you know, their own well-being, their own welfare. You know, the house is a bit of a disarray. They hoard mail, they hide it. So there's piles of stuff hanging around all over the place, or boxes. They get really agitated. People get very defensive, and you know, they're quite secret about it. And you know, a lot of people will just, if they are caught out or suddenly they want to speak about it, which is very, very important, they'll say, I've been so silly, I was so stupid, why did I do that? It was just stupid me. Now, what we're finding now is the demographic has changed completely. And it used to be it would be the elderly type person that would be going, oh, you know, I don't want to speak about it. Actually, the demographics changed dramatically. And in the last 18 months, we see that everybody is targeted. So the more I'm seeing more and more people who are sort of 20 going, oh, I've been so stupid, you know, how, you know, but these are the people that won't speak out about it. And these are the people that we now need to actually listen to a lot more. Next slide. So the impact of financial abuse, well, as I say, you know, it's just horrific, really, because you've got the financial aspect, you've got the welfare aspect, you've got the psychological aspect. I mean, I've had people who've had whole life savings disappear. One lady was receiving nuisance calls at 3 AM in the morning. She was getting so anxious about it. She was having to come down the stairs, tripping hazard, all the rest of it. She was 86. Her husband had not long gone into a care home, and every time that phone went, she thought it was somebody trying to tell her that her husband had passed. You know, the threatening letters, the feelings of being trapped, the social isolation, because people still don't want to talk about it. And again, during the last 18 months, we found that social isolation factor has been horrific. People do not know where to go. They've not had the little social groups that they've had before. You know, even us, you know, the office banter, we might have heard somebody in the office talking about something, which we would have said, oh, you know, but you know, that's a scam, or don't do that. We're not having those conversations anymore. And unfortunately, this feeling sometimes, the financial abuse, the feeling of being in the black hole can actually lead to so much despair. Unfortunately, we have had cases where people have actually taken their own life because they have no idea how to get out of that dark hole. Move on to the next slide, please. So there's a bit of a problem as well with sort of recording of incidents, because I've put this in because a lot of authorities do things really well and they do it their own way, and that I have no problem with that whatsoever. And the same with police forces as well. And you know, everybody does their own thing. We are all trying to help. We are all trying to do our best to help our communities. But sometimes it's about the whole recording of these incidents, because we're not able to present a true picture. Doorstep crime, and as it's is underreported, people don't like to report it for one reason or another. And sometimes when they do report it, it's difficult sometimes to collate in the right, or putting it in the right coding, so we're able to retrieve that information at a later date. And you know, I use this when it's like we're talking about sort of, you know, 2 males knock on the door, you know, there's a massive water leak, they go onto the roof, they cause damage, then they pressurise a lady into handing over cash, and then they steal a purse. Now, when that is recorded, it could be recorded for so many different things. It might actually just be damage, could be criminal damage, could be theft. And sometimes it depends on the actual recording officer to see whether actually where that actually goes into. So you can imagine when we're trying to retrieve data at a later date to talk about how many incidents happened, or you know, whether this has been scammed or whatever, it's very difficult sometimes to actually get a true picture of the nature of doorstep crime. And it's not a criticism from any agency, because we're all in this sort of situation. It really does depend on where you're prioritising, because somebody from social services might receive this and actually just see the aspect of the vulnerability or the welfare issues, or the issues that the fact that, you know, there's drainage problems. You know, it's really, that's how we need to sort of work together a little bit more, a better collaborative approach. So yes, criminals love doorstep crime. The motive is always financial. They sometimes rationalise their own offending, because sometimes they'll say, well, it's our culture. We need the money. You don't need your money. They'll even say the victims are greedy, you know, because they're wanting the best deal possible and they deserve it. Sometimes the criminals feel that they're victimised by the enforcement agencies. I hear that all the time. You know, they try and sort of keep gains to their own families sometimes, so certainly with the serious and organised crime groups. But they also do know that the embarrassment factor often means that people won't record, and they also know how difficult it is for us enforcement agencies to actually do something about it from time to time. And also, by doorstep crime, it's transitional. When we're looking at scams, it's anonymous. It is very, very difficult, and not impossible, but very difficult sometimes to actually get to the perpetrators. Next slide, please. Also, on top of all of that, we have experienced such major financial cuts. This is just not trading standards, this is across the whole of the councils. You know, but for trading standards specifically, in 2009, we had quite a big budget. We're now in 2015, it's half of that, is decreasing all the time. We are seriously and severely reduced just now. And particularly in COVID, we ended up having a pile of legislation on us as well. But we still have a job to do, and that's why, again, it's so important that we still continue to do our job and protect our communities. Next slide, please. This is there was a doorstep crime inspector he was, this is his specialism, he used to do some fantastic talks. His name was Brian Steele, and he actually interviewed a criminal in prison, and that's what this criminal actually said, that they like people who live alone. This is what they're actually targeting, because they go back into the houses and they just sort of pretend, and this is what these criminals are trying to rationalise, and he will take thousands of pounds out, and they have no qualms about doing it. We'll go on to the next slide, please. At the dreaded C word, COVID. Oh my goodness, the national picture with this one, crikey. Where do I start? Because it just became a minefield. I'm still like this, because what we found is that there was a 158% increase in online sales in the first few weeks of COVID. And what that gave result to is like more and more people are going online, more and more people doing sort of, buying all these things, putting things on social media. And actually, we found that there was an increase of 1 in 3 people. This was a statistic from Citizens Advice. 1 in 3 people were actually now receiving scams, one way or the other, through that, whether that be text or online or on the phone. I actually think that figure is a lot higher. It's a massive change to the consumer landscape. We are more likely to purchase things online. When during the social isolation process in the first few weeks, we had a lot of people sort of panicking, with a lot of people going, oh, I need this plumber, I need this, and all these sorts of emergency services. What that actually saw was people putting these things onto social media, and the criminals getting in on there going, oh, I can repair that. The problem is, again, people weren't reporting, people were sort of panicking, panic buying. There's all sorts of issues going on with that one. So go into the next slide, please. Now, these are some examples, and I'm sure a lot of you have received these things. I've just taken some examples because I just found them absolutely horrific. What I found was as soon as the government had sort of announced something, whether that would be vaccinations, PPE, anything, the criminals were on it, sometimes within 10 minutes of the government announcements. Now, these all had the common theme, because it was always about clicking on links, and it's always about passing on our personal details so somebody else can exploit us later down the line. And what was actually happening is a lot of the time it sort of comes in, you're not really sure, what's going on with the world, to be honest. All of a sudden, all of these changes left, right and centre. We know that there's vaccines coming out. We know that this is happening and that's happening. And all of a sudden you receive something in your phone and it says it's from the NHS. And not only that, when you click on the link, it looks like a proper NHS platform. So you do start, you're a bit worried, you start filling in those details, only to find actually it is a way of phishing. It's a way of phishing for our personal details. They will either ask for your financial information there and then and scam you there, or they might be a little bit more sophisticated and use it later on. Go on to the next slide, please. This was an email that came through confirming your vaccination. And again, what this was all about phishing for your personal details. Next slide, please. This one was actually about the Brexit. So not only did we have the whole thing about COVID happening, we had Brexit as well. So I started to see an increase of Brexit typos or banking type scams as well. This was just an example that came in. Again, you're clicking on the link, you're asking to verify your bank details. Again, it's all about phishing. Next slide, please. Now, I wish I could actually see you at this present moment in time, because I would be saying to you, first of all, right, has anybody received a knock on the door? And I think there would be some of you that would actually go put your hand up. I think that if I had said to you who's received a text, I think there'd be a few more of you that had actually put your hand up. And if I actually say who's actually received the Royal Mail or Post Office scam, I think there'll be quite a lot of you that received that one. So this particular one, I received it, which is why I was quite confident enough to click through it to be able to show you what was going on. So I received this text out of the blue. You know, and I must admit, having done a lot of press releases about the Royal Mail one, when this came in, it actually threw me, because I clicked on the link. So it says that I've got a missed delivery. Now, I live quite rurally, things like that happen all the time. So I didn't think about it. You know, I was busy working and all the rest of it. And then it takes me onto this platform, Branch Finder. Now, I actually made up a postcode at this point because something wasn't quite right. And so I made up a postcode and it told me that was 5 branches found. I made it up and said I was in Aberdeen, I think. I then go on to, it then takes me on to the next form, find your parcel. So told them that my name was, I'm not a victim, and also that my home address was 25 Scam Street. It then takes me to the next page that tells me that, oh, funny enough, there's an item found for me. Marvellous. And then what it's asking is my date of birth and my phone number. I didn't fill that bit in. But basically what they're trying to do is ask me for my personal details. Now this one didn't ask for any financial details. And in some ways that's what threw me, because they didn't, you know, if they'd asked me for bank details, I'd probably be much more on my guard. And can we go on to the next page, please? Oh, sorry, can we click back away? So then what happens with this particular scam is if people were to fill in their date of birth and the phone number, 5 days later, approximately, just when you've sort of forgotten about it, you receive a telephone call from your bank's fraud department. Now, bearing in mind, you've actually just given your full name, your home address, your date of birth and your telephone number. You've forgotten about that. The bank department, fraud department, will ring up and go with you some security details. Now, you might be a little bit worried and skeptical about this point. I might not give the full details, but actually, they might start going saying, well, we know your date of birth, and they might tell you that, so the confidence. They might have even scammed you previously and find out what, you know, your bank details, because or your actual account number, because you might have filled in something else before, like the Royal Mail scam. So what we're doing is drip feeding all these scams a lot of the time, but these particular scams, the Royal Mail and the Post Office ones, led to a twofold scam. So not only were you perhaps paying you £2.99 delivery or whatever, or in this case it was just your personal details, they would then use that further down the line to become or appear legitimate. One lady I found lost £8,000 just in the course of a couple of hours through thinking that it was the bank's fraud department. It's so horrific, and it's so common, and it's so commonplace that we say that 1 in 3 people have received them. I would actually say it was probably 98% of the population that's now receiving them. They're coming from sim farms, the mass produced, mass marketing on an excessive scale that we've never ever seen before. Can we go on to the next page, please? So what we're doing about it, oh my goodness, I wish there was more that I could do about it. However, I'm really stuck. I'm stuck with trying to, the world is not the same at this present moment. Is not the same. We are still, I'm still working from home most of the time. Things have changed dramatically. However, we still have to really work together. So what I'm finding is that the best thing that we can do at the moment is trying to work with our other agencies, our partners, but also making sure that we're putting out the messages and speaking to people as much as we can. We need to speak to our partner agencies, because you all need to look out for all of these things that are going on. So that's what we have been doing, press releases. Yours truly has been on all sorts of television programs, never done anything like that in my life. got to say, thrown in the deep end with that one. National news coverage, it's been amazing actually. Then the media have just picked it up and gone with it because they see that it's such a significant problem. Been incredible work from our partner organisations. We're all put in this vulnerable category ourselves. You know, we're sort of stretched financially, resources left, right, and centre, and also we're as discombobulated as the rest of the population. But it's our partnership approach that will help produce these results and stop those scumbags. Next, please. And the last word, really, I really like this quote because it is, the community is like a ship, but we all need to be prepared to take the helm. We all need to work together. We all need to get focused to try and tackle what's going on. Okay, thanks very much. And please sort of carry on with the questions, and I apologise if I've not pitched at the right level. I apologise, and hopefully my colleague Samantha will be fantastic about sort of giving you some more localised and regional updates of what's happening. Okay, thanks very much. Samantha, I think it's over to you.
Thanks, Catherine. Hi, everybody. I'm Samantha Barnett. I'm a Trading Standards Officer at Walsall Council. I'm going to speak to you this afternoon briefly about what trading standards do. Catherine's done a brilliant first section. I've got big boots to fill there. Hope it's not going to be similarly. I was unsure about the level to pitch it at. I hope you gain some useful information from my section. As Kellyanne said at the start, I've been in trading standards for 17 years now. I started off as a civil advice officer, so helping Walsall residents with civil complaints, advice, liaising with traders, finance companies, helping them up to and including the small claims court. Because of the environment that trading standards in, we've had to adapt and change how we work. I still deal with a little bit of civil advice, but I deal now predominantly with criminal fair trading matters. Next slide, please. The aim of our talk today is to give you a better understanding of trading standards and what we do. I think most people are aware of our existence. Most people have heard the term trading standards, but on a practical day-to-day level, and I was in this boat before I went into the trading standards world, most people don't really understand what we do. So I'm going to explain our role in life and what we do, and also our main role in doorstep crime and scam matters, and how we can help you. Next slide, please. Now, our day-to-day job is split into three main areas: the areas of enforcement, inspection, and advice. And we in Walsall, like many other authorities, we hope to create and make a fair trading environment for both traders and consumers. We deal with over 60 Acts of Parliament. We deal with over 1,000 regulations, and that is a huge amount of law. Some of it we deal with day to day, and we become very knowledgeable, and we've got expertise in areas. Other pieces of law we deal with as matters and cases arise, but there is a huge amount of information that is placed on at the Trading Standards Officer's lap. We've got 4 broad subject areas of work, and they are broad, but I'm going to give you a little bit of information about each one. Next slide, please. The first main area is metrology, weights and measures. And I think a lot of people, and going back historically, will be aware or have heard of the weights and measures man or the weights and measures woman's going in. And as it says there, a couple of useful, useless, take from it what you will, facts. The first weighing techniques date back to 3000 BC. And the first weights and measures laws were actually formalised in the Magna Carta. Now, the Magna Carta went on about russets, not potatoes, and haberjacks, and how to weigh them. They were both forms of cloth. It was quite typical for the era. Nowadays, you're less likely to see a trading standards officer going out to measure a habaject, although it's not unheard of. But nowadays, you're more likely to see us testing, weighing and measuring equipment in shops, pub spirit measures. We will go into production lines and conduct quantity checks, and we'll also monitor manufacturing and production lines. Next slide, please. The second area is safety, and predominantly product safety. Regulations are out there which specify the safety requirements for all types of products. And as it says, it ranges from cars to cooking utensils to toys to makeup, you name it. There is probably going to be some regulations, some standards concerning that broad spectrum of items. If we have complaints or if we've got concerns, we often get these items inspected. We'll advise traders, we'll advise manufacturers, we'll advise importers. And ultimately, we can undertake prosecutions if the course of the investigation leads us to believe there's a big safety issue out there and trading standards need to take action. We can also force traders, importers, manufacturers. We can also help assist with product recalls so that members of the public are aware, if you bought this product, you'll have heard and seen these recalls, take it back to where you purchased it from, get your money back, etc. We will advise on that process. The picture there, it's an oldish picture now, but it's a good example. All of the items have dangers. Some are quite obvious. Some items will have exposed wires, some of the electrical items. Some are hidden. At the bottom of the picture, you can see a hammer. Now, there are certain regulations and standards about what implements like hammers should be made out of. Now, we find in the world we live in, a lot of cheap imports are coming into the country. That hammer there, it was imported into the country. One of our officers found it on a routine inspection in the shop, so just thought, oh, I'm not sure about that. He brought it back to the office. He sent it away to an analyst, and then these items will be subject to certain tests. And it came back that it wasn't made, it wasn't withstanding the tests. And ultimately, I don't know if you can see, but the end, in effect, breaks off quite easily. Now, if you were using that, obviously the repercussions could be, it could flick up and into the eye. So obviously then on the back of that, a prosecution did ensue. And obviously that it was a successful prosecution and these hammers were taken out of the consumer marketplace. Next slide, please. As part of safety, we also deal with food, and it's a huge area. And we look at food safety. There's 4 headings there: labelling, composition, traceability and food fraud. In the course of a food investigation, these headings will quite often overlap each other. They're not standalone issues. Food labelling, as you would expect, there are rules, laws, regulations all about what should be on a food label. Now, these have been tightened in recent years and new laws have come in, and it's quite a big topic at the moment about allergies. And for example, the law as it states, there's 14 allergens, and if that food item contains one of those 14 allergens, then that food label needs to tell you as the end consumer that it's there. Now, this is going to be tightened further in the future due to the recent case, which you will all have heard of, about the young girl who unfortunately lost her life because she consumed a pret-a-manger sandwich and it had got an allergen in, obviously, which she was allergic to. I think it was sesame seeds, but don't quote me on that. And she had a bad reaction and she unfortunately lost her life, because that is ultimately, if you do not know what you're consuming, the worst case scenario is that. So the law will be tightening. So the likes of Pret-a-Manger and other people who are supplying pre-packed goods like that, there will be an obligation on them in the future to make consumers aware of those allergens. Composition, it's what the food is made of. So for example, you go and buy a beef and onion pie. You've got a suspicion that the beef isn't beef. And you think, well, surely it's got to be, it says it's beef. I can eat beef. It tastes a bit off. You come to us, you raise a complaint, we would go to the shop you bought it from, or if the manufacturer's in Walsall, we'd go to them, and we would take a sample of this beef and onion and we would get it sent to an analyst and we would test it. Depending on the findings, we would go back, we would follow the food chain of where it was manufactured, etc. If it's just been supplied in Walsall, we'd follow it back to the manufacturer. And ultimately, again, prosecution action can ensue, because again, and I know I stress it a lot, but we're there so that you as consumers, you know what you're buying, you take it off the shelf, and that's exactly what you get. Traceability, as I say, I've touched on it a bit just in the composition explanation, but we do inspections and visits. We will go into the local corner shop and we will look round, and we will go into food production lines in our area and we will look round, and we will take samples and we will get them tested. And as I say, we will follow that chain back. And if those samples come back with any concerns, then trading standards can and will take action. Food fraud. Now, the best example of this from recent years is probably the horse meat scandal. We all remember the horse meat scandal, that the government were made aware that horse meat was in the food chain. Now, as a country, as the UK, we do not use horse meat. Other countries do, namely France, and it's accepted that they use it. Our sensibilities and laws and rules are different. So all trading standards, it was mass action all around the country, including us at Walsall. We went out on a huge number of visits and we looked for meat items that we thought could have the potential to have traces of horse meat in. We found them. And these traces of horse meat that we found, ours in Walsall weren't on a huge scale, but we did find items which had the horse meat in. And that fed back to the national level. And once again, it was all to do with keeping our residents and everybody in the country safe, and so that they're fully aware of what they were eating. Now, that was food fraud on a national level, but food fraud can also occur on a local level. And probably one of the best examples of this is the substitution of spirits in pubs. People sort of joke that it happens at Christmas. It happens all through the year and can happen. For example, you go into the pub, you see the Smirnoff bottle behind the counter, you like your Smirnoff, you have your Smirnoff, and you think, that doesn't taste like Smirnoff. Once again, we've got the powers to go into that pub, inspect their vodka as well as other spirits, and we can take samples, and then we would refer back to the brand holder, so Smirnoff, and we would ask them to test it. And similarly again, if they came back and said, no, that's not our product, then there are many issues there that we would then take action with, in that example, the pub, and ultimately prosecutions and fines, etc., can follow. Next slide, please. Fair trading. This is the field of day-to-day work that I mainly work in. It's a broad heading. It covers a huge range of trading standards laws, types of complaints. There's 5 that I mentioned there. Counterfeiting, all the items in that picture are counterfeit items. They've come from places around the Walsall borough. We will go to shops, markets, and if we have got suspicions that goods are counterfeit, we have got the powers to seize them, and we will take them off sale and we will get them tested. As you can see, it doesn't just apply to clothes, CDs, it applies to things like toys in the background there. You name it, if somebody can copy it, then they will. The genuine brand holders are obviously losing out on a huge amount of money by those items being copied. But again, the big issue is that you as a consumer, you are not getting what you pay for because you're not getting the genuine item. We deal with underage sales, where we have complaints of shops selling age-restricted items to minors. We will recruit school children and we will send them in. They will have a video camera, a covert camera. You wouldn't know it was a camera, but there will be a camera on them somewhere, and they will record what happens. Usually it's to buy cigarettes or alcohol. and they make the sale. We as officers are normally in close proximity. If not, one of us will be in the shop at the same time as well, just pretending to be a customer. And when that child comes out, if she's bought some cigarettes, they will be bagged and tagged, and then we will go back to the shop and an investigation will carry on. About 12 months ago, I had a prosecution where a shop not only had sold cigarettes to minors, but they'd also been splitting packets. So they'd sold a single cigarette to a minor. Once again, that's a criminal offence. And that shop assistant, and that shop owner, should I say, got quite a big fine. But in effect, what he thought was, well, it's only a single fag. What harm is that going to do? But there's lots of issues. Children can develop a habit. It can lead to more antisocial behaviour issues, littering issues. There's a whole host of different issues, not legally based, which tie in with underage sales, health issues, etc. So once again, we go in, we take prosecutions with a view to stopping all of the associated problems that go with it. Misleading pricing and unfair contracts. They can be misleading pricing of anything. You have to know what you're paying for goods. So if something says it's £5.99, then that is what you should pay. Similarly, unfair contracts. Contracts cannot be unfair. They should be fair, reasonable, etc. And trading standards can take an educated view if a contract is presented to us on our opinions on if that contract is fair, just, reasonable, etc. And we can take further action if we believe it not to be. Sometimes that action is as much as working with the trader to rewrite terms and conditions. Other times it can be more forceful action. Finally, doorstep crime and scams, which is why we're all here today. And I'll talk a bit now about doorstep crime and scams. Next slide, please. As Catherine has gone through in brilliant, great depth, there are many types of doorstep crime and scams, not limited to those 5 sections there. But the main ones that we hear about regularly are property maintenance, lotteries, prize draws. You get the post saying you won. Telephone scams, we all get those, usually when you're about to sit down and eat. The phone rings, you pick it up, it's an automated response, or it's somebody who appears to be not even in this country. You hear lots of hustle and bustle in the background trying to sell you stuff which you really don't want. Mobility equipment sellers, home security sellers. We in Walsall have had complaints of both of these types of scams where people are targeted. Genuine people with genuine mobility issues are targeted, trying to get them to buy gadgets, devices, not limited to wheelchairs, but anything to do with mobility. They buy them at hugely inflated prices when they could have gone to local sellers or even the NHS and got them much cheaper, if not free. Home security, people, they have a telephone call or a door knock offering a fully all singing, all dancing alarm system. It's linked in with the fire service. It's linked in with the police. You can pay a monthly contract. It will be brilliant. You'll be really safe. You haven't got to worry. Plays on people's sensibilities. And then if they have cause to, unfortunately, the alarm is used, they find out it's not linked to the police. It's not linked to the fire brigade. They're paying all this money for very little. It's not what it's been claimed at the point of sale. So once again, we will step in, we'll take action, we'll investigate. Next slide, please. The trading standard doorstep crime typical complaint, and they're all different and they can all go off down a different avenue. But as a matter of course, if we get a doorstep crime complaint at Walsall, we've got a rapid response system. The complaint will be forwarded to us via our call centres. 99% of the time, if resources allow, we have got whoever's available will go out, we'll deal with the victim in situ, usually nearly always in their home, in their place of residence. If the trade is still present, we'll deal with them, we'll look at paperwork, we'll take the pressure off that consumer in that moment in time when they're feeling scared, vulnerable, they're not sure what to do. We'll then liaise with family, friends, neighbours. We'll deal with the police. Quite often we try and get the police to attend with us because the police have got extra powers. So we can't, if a trader kicks off, gets aggressive, we haven't got the powers to arrest. We can't stop that happening. The police have. So we work together. Then the hard work really starts. We've calmed the consumer down. The traders we've got rid of them, they've gone off site, they're not going to carry on with the work. What they have done is poor. No, you're not doing that. You haven't given the right paperwork. We begin to investigate. We start an investigation log. We gather the evidence. We take statements. We give ongoing support. We look into the trader. We try and establish who they are, who they really are. Quite often they give fake names, addresses. And it all leads to whether we, as an authority, take a prosecution. Now, you're sitting there probably thinking, well, don't you always take prosecutions? That's really bad. They've been to Mrs. Jones. She hasn't got cracked ridge tiles and they've charged her thousands, but in effect, nothing. It's not always as simple as that. Sometimes Mrs. Jones or Mr. Smith, they decide they don't want the thought of going to court. They're in their 90s. They, even with support, they don't feel they can give that statement to do that. We sometimes have difficulty locating the trader. They have fake number plates, they give fake names, fake addresses. And sometimes, as awful as it sounds, even with our resources open to us as an enforcement agency, we can't find them. We don't know who they really are. And they, in effect, just disappear. And they're the frustrating ones because we know that they will do it again. Now, that doesn't always happen, and we do get successful prosecutions. But quite often, this is where, as I say, the hard work starts in trying to establish all these and get everything in place so the jigsaw all fits together, and then our legal team can say, yes, we'll prosecute. Sometimes, as I say, for a myriad of different reasons, prosecution might not be, on that one occasion, looking at the circumstances, the most appropriate form of remedy. We can give something called a simple caution, where we can get the trader in, they're formally cautioned, no action is taken at that stage, but if we have cause to investigate further, then that simple caution and obviously the history of that trader will be brought into account, and it probably then would lead us to take more formal action at the next complaint. Next slide, please. This is our armour, this is the law, this is the dry bit, the boring bit, but without this, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. For doorstep crime, there's 3 or 4 main pieces of legislation. This is one of them. The consumer contracts, information, cancellation and additional charges regulations of 2013. Now, this is what we look for when we go out. We find that trader, we find that he or she is doing work at a property, and straight away in that moment, we are looking for things to try and say, right, on your bike, disappear, you're not doing this right, give us your details, go on your way, we'll be in touch. And what we look at is paperwork. Quite often they don't give any paperwork, so that's really easy. They're not complying with these regulations. If you listening to this in your day-to-day job or personally, if you hear of people in this situation, look for things like this. Look to see if there's a model cancellation form like is highlighted there. Look to see if they've been given terms and conditions, and it has to be in a durable medium, on paper, etc. Look to see if it's clear. Is there, as I say, that model cancellation form? You tend to find there'll either be nothing or there'll be really small writing, normally on the back end, on the reverse of the contract, and it will all be legalese jargon. Now, the chances are that won't comply. You tell that person you come into contact with, tell trading standards, or you refer it to us directly, and then we'll have the final say on that. But the chances are we can use that then as a leverage to say, right, no, they're not doing their job properly, and we can then try and look to take some action. Next slide, please. These 2 pieces of law we use regularly for fair trading matters. The Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations 2008, it deals with misleading actions. So if somebody is like obviously trying to mislead and they just lie, etc. It also deals with misleading omissions, whereby their omission by what they're not telling the consumer. And it's something that's quite salient to that contract, that job, and it's things that they should be made aware of. And by not telling them, that trader could be ultimately committing an offence under these regulations. There's also 31 banned practices. Now, these banned practices, for example, if a trader claims to be a member of a code of conduct, or they display a trademark for an organisation for which they're not a member. So they're drawing that customer in. They're saying, look at us, we're a member of X, Y and Z. and then we look into it and no, they're not, and that is straight away, it's prohibitive, you cannot do it, it's a banned practice. These regulations also look at aggressive practices, which a lot of traders are. So once again, we can pull in that element if they've been aggressive or if they've tried to push and coerce and really just go on and on and on as a consumer. And as you see there, the maximum sentence is, and that's a slight mistake on the side, it's an unlimited fine, up to 2 years in prison or both. The Fraud Act deals with dishonest conduct, again, false representations, failure to tell legal information, information when there's a legal right, or fraud by abuse of the position. As officers, we have to prove that this trader intended to make a gain, cause a loss, or the risk of loss to another. And the Fraud Act is quite a straightforward piece of legislation for us as officers, and it's got a brilliant penalty, and maximum penalty is a maximum sentence of 10 years imprisonment. So you can see these pieces of law, they're strong pieces of law, they're important, and these are the ones that we would try and throw at the doorstep crime people. Next slide, please. Prevention and support. How do we prevent doorstep crime? Well, we do talks, we do things like this. We go out to community groups. I led the campaign for us at Walsall, and I went into all of the dementia cafes in Walsall, and we pitched a very basic type talk at the people who live there, who visited these cafes, and they do have dementia, and their friends and family. A lot of them still lived independently, but we aimed it so that the friends and family, and hopefully they would know what to look out for. We go to schools and do talks about our job, what we do. We've been to local MP-led community engagement fairs, all to do with educating. If people are aware, they may not remember all the ins and outs, they may not remember the law as I've just explained it, but they'll remember that trading standards deals with doorstep crime. We deal with counterfeiting, we deal with cancellation of contracts, and then they can come to us and ask advice, and we can take over. Publicity, leaflets, articles in community newsletters, to make people aware who we are, what we do, where we live, etc. Which at the moment it's at home, but we're still at the end of an email, we're still at the end of a telephone, and we're still doing the job as well as we used to do. We react to local and national peaks. Recently, we've given out in recent years call blocker devices. We were given nationally, there was an amount of money for call blockers, and we could claim so many each authority. And if we felt a resident was getting a lot of harassment calls, we could set up and give them a call blocker device to then see, obviously, if the calls dropped, which every single time they did, and that made that consumer feel safer, etc. And that was a really successful campaign that, as I say, was done nationally. Support, we do follow-up work with victims. We deal and signpost to other agencies, e.g. adult safeguarding, victim support, action fraud. We do follow-up educational work, leaflets again, videos, websites. We want to empower you as members of the public to know what to look for regarding scams, doorstep crime, and anything else you may have fallen foul of. Next slide, please. What should I do? What should you do? People who you come across in your day-to-day working life, what do you tell them to do if they've been subjected to any of this? If the trade is still present or they've only recently left the premises, call West Midlands Police on 999. Also, if you feel the trade has been aggressive, they've forced their way into the property, as soon as you can, please tell them to ring 999. Alternatively, and this is unique to Walsall, that's the main switchboard at Walsall, we've also got a generic trading standards call centre number, which is for the Citizens Advice Consumer Service, and that's the 0808 223 1133. Or you can email. As I say, we might signpost you in other directions, but we will answer that email and we'll give you that advice. For doorstep crime, the rapid response procedure will be activated, and trading standards officers should be able to attend immediately in the majority of cases. Next slide, please. Now, this is a case study that I was the officer for at Walsall Trading Standards. It was a case that I'll refer to the victim, this isn't their real names, but I'll refer to the victim as Mary and the offender as Dave the Roofer. And this was one from a few years ago. And the householder, Mary, she was a lady in her late 70s. She lived alone and was of sound mind, but she was slightly vulnerable in that she'd had quite a severe stroke in previous years. And she'd got no family or friends really who lived close to her. She'd noticed her garage roof was leaking, and the garage being quite a large area, which led to a rear extension. And winter was coming, so she was conscious she needed to get the roof repaired in case of bad weather. She'd seen a group of workmen in the local area, and they'd been about for a few weeks. So she thought, oh, so-and-so down the road, oh, they've been to that house. And when one of them knocked on her door one afternoon, asking if there was any work she needed doing, any general building work, roofing work, she was like, great, yes, I do. She trusted them. They'd been in the area. She'd seen them about. And they came and quoted and looked at this leaking garage roof. The trader, Dave, tells Mary he needs to strip off all of the old roof and the extent from the roof, the garage roof and the extension, and it's going to cost £3,500 and take 4 men 3 days to complete. Now remember that, because that's quite critical. So a total of 12 individual working days. She's happy, the work can be done and it'll be sorted for the winter, so she readily agrees, yes, the work can go ahead. Dave was chatty. He was making comments while he was in Mary's lounge. She got pictures in this lounge, family pictures. He made small talk with her. She felt comfortable with him. He gained her trust. From our point of view, we would say that was the start of the deception and the grooming. There was one photo in her lounge. It was of her son, and he died in a motorbike accident. Dave then proceeds to tell Mary that he'd had a relative who died in a motorbike accident too. They'd got that common ground, and it was a personal subject for Mary, one that even in the months afterwards when we were talking with her, she would get upset. And this accident had happened 10, 15 years before. It's very personal to her. And when Dave said, oh yes, I had a relative, she felt that shared compassion with him. Did he have that relative? We'll never know. It could have been a pack of lies. But he was drawing her in. There was common ground between them. Dave gave Mary an invoice with details on of what he was going to do. He asked for £1,500 as a deposit, an additional £100 for the skip. She didn't doubt it, she didn't question it, why would she? So she didn't have that money in the house, so he offered to drive her to the bank. Now you've seen this on news reports, TV, art and road trader programmes, and traders still offer to drive consumers to the bank. Now Mary she could drive herself, but she was like, no, that's really handy, yeah, we'll get there quicker. So she accepted. She withdrew the full amount of £3,500, but to be fair at that stage, she just paid the deposit, which is what he'd asked for. The following day, Dave and 2 others started to arrive to start the work. So not the 4 men that he'd originally quoted and said would be working on the roof. And at the end of the very first day, Dave asked for the remaining money. Now, Mary noticed that the original invoice also seemed to have disappeared off her kitchen table, which explained exactly how long it was going to be, which explained what they were going to do, and the original price. And she noticed that there was another invoice there, which is not what she'd seen originally. And it didn't show the amount of work, and it didn't show the time it would take. At this point, she also noticed there were items missing from her home, a key fob to the garage, a sat-nav. She began to get fearful. She began to worry that one of the workmen had taken them. She'd got no basis for this, but it seemed too coincidental. She asked the men to stop work and leave. Next slide, please. Now, oh, sorry, I've gone to my next slide a bit too quickly, but can we go back to the last one? Is that okay? She'd asked them to leave, and Dave became aggressive. He started swearing at Mary, causing her to feel afraid and anxious. So she called upon a couple of neighbours, and negotiations occurred. They took over. Mary couldn't deal with it. And it was agreed the work would be completed the following day. Mary, at this stage, she felt vulnerable. She was afraid. She knew her garage door key and her car key fob had gone missing. She thought they could return. She was really concerned they'd got these keys. And she was alone. She was scared, but she felt she just wanted them out of her life, out of her hair. She wanted the work done. She agreed for it to be done, and they started again the following day and finished the following day. Again, much less than the original 3. This time it was 3 men over 2 days, so much less than the original 4 men over 3 days. Mary just wanted them gone, so she paid the remainder of the money. They went, but she began to look about, and she began to look like in the skip that they'd left. And in the bottom of the skip, there was just gravel. There wasn't the other roof material, and they told her that they were going to strip the entire roof. Her suspicions were rising more and more as she thought about it and looked back over the previous few days. She was concerned whether the work had been done correctly. They'd been up on the roof, there was gravel in the skip, they'd obviously done something, but she was concerned that they hadn't done it correctly, and she wouldn't know. She couldn't get up on the roof. She got nobody to ask to look. So she contacted the Citizens Advice. They advised her, but they referred the case to us for trading standards. We visited Mary the very next day. The trader had gone. We couldn't do that rapid response that we can do when they're still there. But we went the next day. We spent a few hours with her. We took notes. We supported her. We tried to reassure her. She was really worried that somebody was going to come back. And we was like, no. We raised it with the police. Ultimately, the police looked into it and they couldn't prove that the trader had stolen the items, unfortunately. Next slide, please. We then instructed an independent surveyor. They carried out a full inspection of the roof. It concluded several faults. The true value of the job was zero. There was literally no value in that job whatsoever. There were lots of examples of poor workmanship. We made contact with Dave. It was a trader we could find out where he was, and we invited him for interview. The surveyor's professional report backed up what we knew and proved what Mary and us thought, that the claims made to her had been false. They were lies. He was an elusive character, was Dave. He cancelled his interview several times. Eventually, we got him in. A date and time was set. He came in. He disputed all of the surveyor's findings, as is normal. When questioned about his experience, he admitted he knew about flat roofs, but wasn't that good. And when it came to using a heat gun, it scared him, and it is a quote from the interview, "You've got to be careful you don't burn things and set fire to stuff." Which is quite a wise quote from a trader with allegedly 20 years roofing experience. We got the evidence package together, our legal team agreed, we put it before the courts. Next slide, please. The district judge at the magistrates found him guilty of the fraud offences. He was given a £1,200 fine, a compensation order of £3.5 grand, which is what Mary had paid, and costs of £1,300. It's a common story. The trader will groom their victims and gain trust. And these traders often have great interpersonal skills and use these to exploit the friend and groom. This is a long story, but we feel it illustrates the issues that are faced not only by vulnerable households, but also by us as enforcement agencies. Mary may not have called Citizens Advice, and therefore we would not have known about it. Dave wasn't a trader we knew about, and while the figures involved were quite low compared to some, the overall value of the work was zero. There was no value in it. So it's therefore important that we all play our part in recognising the telltale signs of financial abuse, doorstep crime, and you report it to us at Trading Standards. Now, I'm now going to pass you over to Jerry Winthrop from Dudley, who's going to give you another example of some good work that Dudley Trading Standards have done.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, first thing I want to do is share a case study with you that I think amply illustrates issues around reporting and investigating doorstep crime. Now, the case study itself is over 10 years old, but I think it amply illustrates what I'm going to talk to you today about some issues we still have. So how did it all start? Well, the slide in front of you shows a photograph of Alice's house. You can see Alice's house behind the vehicle. It's got the two grab rails on the door. Next slide, please. Now, Alice was a lady. She's 77 years old and lived alone in Smethwick. She had no support network, no relatives or anything like that. One day she was at home when she was cold called by two males who told her she had a problem with the roof and it needed fixing straight away. And it was her good luck that they actually had the materials on their van so they could carry out the repair that day. So Alice, not knowing any difference, she allowed them to go ahead and carry out the repairs. The men went onto the roof, and shortly after, one of Alice's neighbours who lived across the road saw the two men on the roof, and instead of repairing the roof, they're in fact damaging it. The neighbour saw them pulling away the lead flashing from around the chimney to make the matters worse. The neighbour was obviously concerned, but didn't feel confident enough to confront the traders themselves, and why would they? So the neighbour reported the matter to Trading Standards. Trading Standards officers went out on a rapid response to the address, but unfortunately when they got there, the traders had left. So they spoke to Alice, who told them what had happened, and Alice said, well, the traders are going to come back the next day to finish off the work. She also disclosed that she'd already paid them £1,240 by way of a cheque. Now, my colleague, some of you may know him, but I won't identify him, decided the best way to deal with this was to ring the traders up there and then and to tell them not to come back the following day, which he duly did do. Now, at that moment in time, all we knew was that the traders were named Frank and Dave. They traded as Bishop's Property Services from Birmingham. My colleague rang them up and spoke to Dave, who basically told him, well, I don't care if you're trading standards, you can't do anything. As far as I'm concerned, you can put your broom where the sun doesn't shine and do one. Now, some of you may know my colleague, which I won't identify, but that was like a red rag to a bull, and he got the bit between his teeth and decided to look into the matter more deeply. Can I have the next slide, please? So what happened next? Well, my colleague started a criminal investigation, and it was quickly found that Dave was a man called Stephen Allen. Now, he wasn't that bright, unfortunately, because he'd actually had the cheque from Alice paid into his own bank using his own name, so it was quite easy to identify. As a result of this, my colleague, together with the local police, obtained a warrant and executed it and went into his home address. He wasn't there at the time, but evidence was seized. Following on from that, some phone analysis was done in relation to the mobile phone number that we knew at the time, and this gave us some billing information. And on that billing information, it was quite clear that the phone that Dave and Frank were using was being used to call a number of other phones on a regular basis. Now, at that time, although I wasn't involved at that point, I became involved at that time, and I was able to, by using the police systems, to run the phone numbers through the police system, and we identified a number of individuals who had been repeatedly called by Dave and Frank. And when we looked at the police records, it was people with typical elderly persons names like Winifred, Cyril, Bert, who were ringing up the police to report different matters to them. So it's decided that we would pay personal visits to these victims to see why Dave and Frank had been calling to them. Can I have the next slide, please? One of these people was a lady called Brenda. Now, this is Brenda's house that you can see on the screen. Terraced house in Handsworth, Birmingham. Typical, again, grab rail on the front door, old green paint. Now, Brenda was in the late 80s, so she's a bit older than Alice. She'd lived alone for at least 20 years since her husband passed away. She had no relatives to speak of, no regular visitors. She'd lived there the whole of her life. In fact, the only time she moved out was when during the Second World War, when there was a bombing raid and some of the local houses were damaged and she had to move out. But moved back in shortly after that. Can I have the next slide, please? She'd actually paid out £19,000 to these traders or roofers. In fact, that was all her life savings that we found out at the time. She had got some paperwork, which was very crude, handwritten paperwork, nothing on pre-printed stationery or anything like that. And it's quite clear to us that the traders, criminals, had come back on a number of occasions and allegedly repeated the work that they said they'd done. For instance, they said that they'd repointed the ridge tiles or rebedded them on more than one occasion. The chimney had been pointed on more than one occasion. Tiles had been replaced on more than one occasion. And as you can see, she'd actually paid £19,000 out to these traders for repairs to a roof. Now, for those of you who don't know, a property such as Brenda's, a mid-terraced house, would probably cost between £7,000 and £10,000 to be completely re-roofed. So that's new tiles, lath, felt, and yet she paid out £19,000 for some very basic minor repairs. But Brenda didn't know any difference, unfortunately. As a result, we instructed an independent surveyor to come out and have a look at the repairs that the traders had undertaken for Brenda, and he found that the work was not necessary. Very little work had in fact been done, and what work had been done was of a very poor standard. Next slide, please. Further investigation showed that a number of different companies had become involved, allegedly. There were invoices in the name of Harveys and Haydens, which again were both from Birmingham. And like Alice, the traders' names for Dave and Frank. The mobile phone number and the billing analysis on was also shown on the paperwork. So we knew then that we were dealing with the same people. The traders, according to Brenda, had only stopped visiting her when she'd run out of money. And she said on the last occasion they came round and she paid them the last money. She burst into tears saying, well, that's it. I've got no more money left. I'm going to be put into the workhouse. It's had a terrible effect on her. And it was one of the most emotional investigations I've ever undertaken, to be honest. To compound matters, the neighbour across the road who looked out for Brenda had on occasion seen the traders on the roof and realised something was not right, and she rang the police, and the police attended and actually confronted the traders on site. They identified them and spoke to them, and the traders gave their side of the story. Brenda gave her side of the story, but the police didn't take any action because Brenda had willingly given the money over to the traders, all £19,000 of it, and because of that, the police said no offence had been committed. So the matter's recorded but wasn't investigated further, and unfortunately they didn't tell trading standards either. Next slide, please. On this slide, you can see Dave and Frank. Dave was Stephen Allen, aged 40 at the time, and Frank was Vincent Smith, two upright citizens from Birmingham. Next slide, please. As I said earlier, we were able to link Smith and Allen to a number of building companies: Bishop's Roofing Services, Alderbrook Roofing Services, Initial Building Services, Harveys, Haydens, and A1 Roofing Elite. And they used different companies at different times to frustrate any investigation or enforcement action against them. Next slide, please. Right, so our investigation progressed and we identified a number of victims across the West Midlands and Warwickshire region, and here are some of them. Next slide, please. First one we visited was Brenda. Now, she was aged 56, so she was considerably younger than most of our victims. She's a retired community nurse. Like the others, though, she lived alone and had very little in the way of a support network. She had again paid £18,900 to Bishop's Property Services, one of the companies we could link to Dave and Frank. Now, as I've just said, a repair to property such as Brenda's should only have cost between £7,000 to £10,000, but she wasn't aware of that. In fact, she's paid twice the amount of money to have a roof repaired on 2 occasions. Now, the traders tricked her into having the work done by showing a photograph on their phone, which purported to show the damage to her roof and her chimney. In fact, they show the same photograph to a number of our other victims. And again, we got a surveyor out to look at the property, and again, the surveyor found out that poor quality work had been carried out, and that some of the work the traders had claimed to have carried out wasn't in fact done. Next slide, please. Then we visited Catherine from Cannock, again, 82 years old, which is about the typical age for a doorstep crime victim. She again lived alone, again, no support work to speak of. And in Catherine's case, she suffered from dementia. She told that she'd been cold called by Dave and Frank, and they'd done lots of work at a property on the roof again, and she thought she'd paid them £2,000. Whilst we were there speaking to her, we asked to look at her checkbook because she'd paid by cheque. We went through the cheque stubs, and again, she'd paid £17,900 in cheques to Dave and Frank. Again, considerably twice as much as to have the property re-roof. Another surveyor went out and again found the same thing: poor quality work and non-existent work to the roof. Next slide, please. Right, next victim is Walter from Brown Hills, age 70, Walter was registered blind. Again, no support network, lived alone, was helped out by carers who came in on a daily basis to assist him. He had other significant health issues which made him very vulnerable. Again, he was cold called by different roofers. We don't know whether it's Dave and Frank all the time, but Dave and Frank certainly visited him on more than one occasions. And he'd paid out £6,500 to Bishop's Property Services, again for poor quality and non-existent work. With this one, the carers had encountered Dave and Frank on more than one occasion, who told them they're there to do work, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, they didn't notify any enforcement agencies. So a chance to stop that criminal activity was actually lost at that time. Finally, next slide, please. Graham from Great Barn. Now, Graham, interesting gentleman, age 63 at the time, retired professional, very learned, but he was living alone after caring for his mother, who'd passed away the previous 12 months. He'd been cold called by Dave and Frank and paid out £9,000 to Alderbrook Roofing Services, again for poor quality and non-existent work. Graham was a repeat victim. He'd been victim of several other different scams. He'd had his roof replaced on a couple of occasions, double glazing, garage conversion, waterproofing. He'd even been sold some diamonds which didn't exist. So Graham was your typical victim. Next slide, please. Our investigation continued, and we found out that Smith and Alan were basically a pair of rogues. Smith had access to a mobility vehicle. Even though he was ripping off people on a daily basis. Neither had a proper job, and neither had any tax record of any sort, even though they were 40 and 38 years old. They identified their victims by putting an advert in Yellow Pages, which is quite, well, doesn't really happen these days, and by cold calling. And they earned at least £150,000 in 2 years by carrying out bogus property repairs. That's a guesstimate, we believe. We believe the actual figure was much more than that. Next slide, please. Both of them were linked to a network of similar offenders across the Birmingham area. It was the first joint investigation by West Midlands Police and Trading Standards, and as a result, we got evidence relating to 9 victims before the courts. Unfortunately, some of our victims were either too ill or had in fact passed away prior to the court case. And last slide, please, on that. The outcome. Good outcome for us. Alan received 3.5 years and Smith 5 years. Alan got 3.5 years because he pleaded guilty. A story there. This case was taken by the CPS, who prosecuted on behalf of West Midlands Police and Trading Standards. CPS were very wary about this case because of the civil element to it, and in fact, on the day that Alan was in court, we're going to drop the charges against him. Fortunately for Alan, his barrister beat us to it, and his barrister went up to the CPS barrister and said, my client is going to plead guilty. So we got away with one there. Smith got 5 years because he pleaded not guilty and upset the judge. Next slide, please. Right, just going to quickly run through some issues in relation to reporting doorstep crime. Next slide, please. Now, research has shown that doorstep crime is massively underreported. In fact, it's believed that only 10% of all typical crime is reported. There's a number of reasons for that. Some of the most common ones are embarrassment. The victim is embarrassed by what's gone on. They said they're stupid, fallen for it, and don't want to tell anyone else about it, so it never gets reported. Some people are in fear of the criminals that have committed this sort of crime. They don't want them coming back, intimidating them or damaging the property. Other people believe it's not worth reporting the crime because what's going to be done about it? Some, they don't know who to report to. There's confusion about whether it's a civil matter or a criminal matter, so do they speak to the police or Trading Standards. Others, they don't want to get involved in the justice system, so they don't want to go to court and give evidence. And finally, some have been scammed so well they haven't got an idea that they've been scammed. The scam is so good, they believe that they've been sold a good product or a good service and don't know they've been scammed until we get to them. As Catherine mentioned, I think at the very start of this webinar today, the police don't have a category for recording doorstep crime, so the true picture is not known. It could be recorded as a theft, fraud, robbery or blackmail. So is there a problem then? Well, National Doorstep Crime, National Trading Standards Doorstep Crime Report in 2015, which is the latest set of figures I've managed to get hold of, said there was an average loss reported in 2015 of 22.1 million. Now, if that is underreported by 90%, you can see the true figure could be nearly 220 million. So it's a massive problem for us. Next slide, please. So how is Doorstep crime reported? Well, it's reported in a number of ways to different agencies, different people. The most obvious one is the police via 999 or 101, and the police may then put a crime report out or create an incident log for it for officers to investigate at a later date. They may create an intelligence log, which should go into their system, or refer the matter to action fraud. Now, most of you have probably heard of action fraud. Action fraud came about by the setting of the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau in 2006, which is now overseen by the City of London Police, and it was their reporting mechanism for financially motivated cybercrime. Reports are passed to action fraud, and it's reckoned that only a small number actually passed on then to the police and trading standards to further investigate. So people reporting to action fraud may think that something's going to get done about their complaint, but in many cases, unfortunately, it's not. It's just reports taken. Doorstep crimes reported to the Citizen Advice Bureau, who may refer it onto trading standards, depending on whether a referral is made or a notification. It's also reported via the banking protocol, which was set up some time ago, but it was enacted in 2016. It's a partnership between financial institutions and enforcement agencies, which is a method whereby vulnerable potential victims can be safeguarded in financial institutions, and the police informed about it by just ringing 999 and quoting the banking protocol. Other ways of reporting it is via social services. If they're dealing with a client, there may be disclosure there, or people can actually refer via Safeguarding Hub online, and other agencies such as carers, fire service, ambulance service may come across victims of doorstep crime, report it. Next slide, please. As I just said, how is doorstep crime recorded? The police unfortunately don't have a category for it. Trading standards authorities tend to record individually using different systems. Citizen Advice Bureau record complaints and may then refer them onto trading standards, and action fraud record complaints to doorstep crime, which they then may refer on. Next slide, please. Intelligence. Intelligence relating to doorstep crime should, of course, be recorded. Otherwise, you don't get the true picture of what's going on. The police have their own intelligence systems, but they all feed into the Police National Database, which trading standards are about to get access to, or already have access to in some occasions. Trading standards also record intelligence on their IDB intelligence databases, and that intelligence is now shared between both agencies through a memorandum of understanding, although there are some issues at time to time in relation to data protection issues, which we're told exist, but in reality don't. Just final slide, please. If you suspect doorstep crime, be curious, ask if you come across any poor quality or unnecessary building work being carried out. Work is repeated in a short period of time, like Brenda, who had several roofing repairs carried out, short period of time to chimney, ridge tiles. If there's a lack of paperwork for work being carried out, ask why. If cold callers are knocking doors, offering driveway services. Jet washing of roofs and driveways. Jet washing of roofs damages your roof and shouldn't be done. Cold callers going door to door offering goods for sales. Typical example of this is what we call the Nottingham knockers, who go around offering cleaning materials for sale. And at this time of year, particularly opportunist gardeners and tree surgeons who will knock the door offering to cut your trees down. Large amounts of unsolicited mail, products, vitamin items, etc. And if you ever see elderly vulnerable neighbours accepting lifts in a stranger's car or van, which is unusual, ring the police on 999 straight away. And I think that's all for me, folks. Thank you for listening today. Hopefully you found it of some use, and I'll now hand you over to Adam.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Jerry. That was great. So I'm just going to talk to you a bit about the National Trading Standards Scams team and the awareness campaign that we run, and a few other things. So you may well have heard of us. We're a national team based down on the south coast in Eastbourne. And our primary function is to work with key partners, foreign and domestic, to identify scam victims, and we have a referral process, and we pass that information on to local authority training standards officers, who can then go out and perform intervention work with these victims in an effort to protect them and prevent them from becoming from being re-victimized. We also have a team of investigators who look into the mass marketing fraud in relation mainly to mail, but we're also moving into telephone calls. As Catherine was mentioning, in the last year, telephone scams have really been on the rise. We run a number of projects. So we did a DOORSTEP crime project with cameras, which I'll talk about a bit later on. We've also done 3 call blocking projects now, where we've provided free call blockers to vulnerable people throughout the UK. That was what Sam was mentioning earlier. And we also do Friends Against Scams. So next slide, please. Friends Against Scams was launched about 5 years ago, coming up to 5 years now, and it is an online awareness session. It can also be completed face-to-face by someone called a scam champion. So it can, but I have to say, since the pandemic started, no face-to-face sessions have done, for obvious reasons. So it's an online awareness session. It aims to highlight the problem of scams, how to spot them, how to report them, and how to identify victims of these scams. Anyone completing the course online becomes a friend. And as of yesterday, we had 768,000 friends against scams. We really want to get to 1 million, and we could do with your help with that. So next slide, please. Like I said, it's an online learning session, or it's a face-to-face session. Now, the face-to-face sessions can be run by someone called a scam champion. We have over 2,000 scam champions. You can sign up to become a scam champion, and you receive all the resources, the PowerPoint presentations, quizzes, etc. And you can run your own session. You can do it virtually if you wanted to, and you can help add to that counter. We also have businesses that sign up, or organisations that sign up as a Friends Against Scams organisation. We've currently got about 260 of them. And what they do is they pass that information, pass our anti-scam messaging throughout their networks, to their customers, to their staff, to their volunteers, whatever they may be. We have scam marshals. Now, a scam marshal is someone who has previously been a victim of a scam or is being targeted by scams. And what they do is the information they get, so the scam mail that they get, the telephones that they get, they record that and they log that, and they send it into us, so we can use it as intelligence. So I would really encourage you all, after this webinar, to go and visit the Friends Against Scams website and complete the training. You can even just do it on the video. It takes about 8 minutes. Next slide, please. Last April, we launched Businesses Against Scams. Now, the idea behind this was that a lot of businesses were moving out of offices, out of big offices, and individuals were starting to work remotely from home. Now, the thought is that this increases their vulnerability. It removes the chance of that water cooler moment, the talking to colleagues about certain things. So we launched Business Against Scams, which looks at CEO fraud, mandate fraud, tech support scams, and it's about 10 minutes to complete. And again, it's available on the website, and we currently have over 150 businesses employing over 100,000 people. So hopefully we've got that messaging out to businesses throughout the UK. Next slide, please. So, like I said, we're Friends Against Scams is just about to turn 5. So last year, on our 4th birthday, we had Fastathon, where we launched our new video, which takes about 8 minutes to complete, and we encouraged all our organisations, all our partners, to post about the Friends Against Scams online session and video. And we managed to get over nearly 6,500 visits to the website in one day, and converted 1,300 friends, which was a really good day. So look out, there's our Twitter handles and Facebook coming up at the end of this, so please try and follow us on social media. Next slide, please. Like I was saying, a scam marshal is someone who has been a victim or is being targeted and sends in their information to us. What we also ask them to do is to talk to their friends, family, neighbours, build that community resilience about scams, so that they're aiming to protect people within their community from these scams. Now, we relaunched this about 3 years ago, And we have around 2,000 scam marshals now that are all sending information into us or highlighting the problem and raising awareness within their community. We won the Tackling Economic Crime Award for Outstanding Prevention Initiative in December last year. And I've also put a little infographic on how many scam marshals there are in each local authority within the Sensor region. So Dudley doing really well. So please, again, if you think you know someone who could be a really good scam marshal, they often appear on TV. We've had a few scam marshals appear on TV on Rip Off Britain and The Defenders. So they're really good. They really are our army on the ground. Next slide, please. Every December, well, I say every December, last December was the first one, but we're definitely going to do it again. We allow the scam marshals to send in any information to us. They can do that free of charge to that free post address. And that arrives at our Scams Hub here in Eastbourne, and we investigate the mail. We log it, and we work with foreign enforcement agencies or domestic enforcement agencies to help disrupt the criminal process. In December, we opened up the mailbox to everyone in the UK and put loads of social media out about it. Again, asked our Friends Against Scams organisations to help post. We received over 1,000 items of mailing in December and January alone. It was really successful. What really was highlighted was the rise in inheritance scams, where criminals were contacting consumers saying someone of the similar surname as you has died, and we've got $10 million to share with you if you wanted to get in touch. All sorts of scams like that appearing. Next slide, please. Also in December last year, we published a report into the work that the investigators have done in the last 5 years and how their processes help to disrupt the criminals. It was worked out that throughout all the work the Scams team have done, including the awareness raising campaigns and the other projects, that we have saved consumers and society over £120 million in the last 5 years. And we've managed to stop over 10 million items of fraudulent mail arrive on people's doorsteps. It's a really good report. I recommend you go onto it and read it. Next slide, please. So about 2.5 years ago, I started a project looking into the use of CCTV on doorstep victims' homes, on the actual like ring video cameras is probably the most popular one. But I used one that required no interaction from the consumer. I used a product called a Risco product, and it recorded every time there was motion sensed on doorstep. And what we did as part of that is we looked at the consumer's well-being before and after. So we asked them some certain well-being questions, and with the 2 trials that we did, we found that in the 3 months after installation, there were no reports of any doorstep crime. There was no reports of targeting as well, and also that the well-being had improved for these consumers. Now, with that information, we've started a project with London Trading Standards, that's the LTS there, and Trading Standards South East, looking into supplying 3 different products for consumers in London and the South East. Again, we are following that up with a wellbeing survey, and we have installed around 150 units in the areas. We're using the Ring Video Doorbell, which requires user interaction, requires a user to have a smartphone app, so therefore it might not be perfect for everyone. So we also use something called a guard cam, which requires no user interaction at all. It records onto an SD card, so you don't even need Wi-Fi, and it will record any motion onto an SD card, which you can then go and download and have a look at. What we find is this deters the criminals. So if you've got a potentially vulnerable person, we would recommend the use of the guard cam together with a CCTV sticker saying you're being recorded. We also use something called a Tmezen, which is that one at the bottom. It combats the Ring problem in that it doesn't require Wi-Fi. It needs a bit more installation, but it provides a panel that you can look at without having to get up and go and answer the door. So we're hoping to publish the findings of this project late in August, and hopefully roll it out across other regions. So I would suggest keeping your eyes peeled on that one. Next slide, please. Like I said, there's our social media handles, @AgainstScams on Twitter, or I think we're @Friends Against on Facebook. I'd really encourage you to get, if you wanted to become a Friends Against Scams organisation, I'd really encourage you to go to the website and apply that way. It'll come into the team, and then we can get some information out to you. If you wanted to become a scam champion and help add to our counter, that would be really great. Again, you can sign up on the website and receive our details, and you can then add to the counter for us. We want to get to that 1 million by the end of the year. It would be so good. And I think that's it from me. I'll just next slide is just my email address if you wanted to get in touch. And I'm going to hand you back to Kellyanne.
Hi everybody, thank you very much. So we're going to go now over to the Q&A. We've had a few questions come through which I've been collating as we have been going along, so thank you for those that have asked questions. I've replied to some of them as they've come in, because some of them are just about abbreviations and what those abbreviations mean, so I've been responding to those in the chat, in the Q&A function, so everybody can see them. But this question was, and I don't think it's maybe specific to Catherine, but it was when Catherine was talking, and it was around when you were showing some of the examples of kind of two questions here that came under the same bracket. But when you're showing things, when you receive text messages or emails from people like the NHS, from banks, National Lottery, how can either an individual or how can practitioners support vulnerable people in identifying if something is genuine or if it is a scam? So if you've not got that kind of scam mindset, how do we know, and how are we aware of whether it's a genuine email or whether it's something that is a scam? How can people find that information out?
Am I on live now, Kelly? Is this come straight to me now?
Yes, it has.
Oh, that's fine, because I just switched on my chat. Well, really, the advice always is, if it comes out the blue, be suspicious. So anything, just anything, whether it's a knock on the door, or whether you receive it on your phone, or whether it's email, whatever, just be suspicious. Remember, what they're trying to do is get your financial details. What we would advise people to do if they receive something like that is take a few minutes, have a look at it, ask somebody about it. The texts normally will have like NHS alert. It will be something, or it comes, but it'll say NHS alert in the sort of subject area, but actually it'll be a number that is actually just a it looks as though it's coming from a mobile number. What we do then is, go and have a look at the official sites. But if you receive a text message like that, report it to 7726. That actually spells spam on your telephone keypad. But the advice really is just to be cautious, be on your guard, and if it's out of the blue, be a bit suspicious.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And a kind of follow on to that was that if you receive sort of a scam text message from the same type of people, that somebody has come in and said that they always sort of inform the company that it's actually come from, and direct, so they kind of will inform the actual company directly, and they usually ask for a copy of the scam. Is that correct? So if an example came through from a bank and they informed that bank that they'd received this email and they asked for a copy of that, the bank asks directly, is that usual? Is that correct to then send a copy over?
I think that's actually really good advice. If as long as you are actually sending it to your to the bank email, again, just check, double check before you send any of your personal details. But the banks do need that intelligence as well, because they need to try and act on it, to try and put out the bespoke messages, and the new scams that are coming out. They've got to be aware of it as well. But remember, we are trying to work together. So whether that would be the National Scams Team or the DOORSTEP crime teams or enforcement teams, we are trying our best to pass on the intelligence so we're able to act on it, to be able to give the prevention advice as quick as we can, but also to try and able to stop the enablers, to try and pass that on to the telephone providers, to try and stop that numbers being used. There's a lot of work going on in the background.
Thank you, Catherine. The last question that we've had come in, and I think maybe Adam, this was sort of around your presentation, was around leaflets and things that we can put up on within establishments or buildings, things around Friends Against Scams. Is it that they are actually printed in different languages or other formats so that we can reach everybody in society?
Hi. So yeah, we've got plenty of resources available, and signing up as a Scam Champion would allow you access to that. Also, getting in touch with me if you wanted to get in touch with me as well, and send me an email. We can send some information and some resources and some leaflets, booklets. In terms of languages, most of our resources are available in Welsh, but no other language at the moment. We are quite a small team, and we're quite, I would say this, we're not as well funded as we should be, and so we only have resources in Welsh and English, I'm afraid. However, if someone wanted to get in touch and help with the translation, I'm sure we could help. We could do that.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much for that. And I think that's the end of the Q&A of the questions that we've had come through. But I think on the back of that question as well, one of the things that happened recently is there has been Scams Awareness Fortnight that has happened, and it was from the 14th to the 21st of July. And that fortnight, it is an annual campaign, and it's run by Citizens Advice and the Consumer Protection Partnership, and it's about creating a network of confident scam-aware consumers who will be able to recognise a scam. So we have got some materials that I will be sending out to all of you. There's some posters, and the things like, you know, scams can happen to anyone. And there's a poster around scammers won't target me, because people don't feel that, you know, because they're kind of level-headed business people, that actually it won't happen to them. It's around how you can protect other people from scams, and about staying ahead of scammers and different ways in which consumers can protect themselves. So this is something that's come from Citizens Advice. It was a campaign that ran in Walsall and Sandwell, but the posters that we've got are actually, you know, completely universal. That can be used absolutely across anywhere. And the aim of sort of that campaign is around putting posters up and making postcards in public spaces. They asked that everybody pledged a talk to at least 3 people and made people scam aware, and asked those 3 people to then let another 3 people know, so that we were getting the messages out about being scam aware. And I do know that some of those posters are in Polish as well. So I'm going to be getting everybody that's been on the call today, I'm going to be making sure that you receive that in an email along with the evaluation. I haven't been able to post it in the link because it's quite a long link and it won't allow me to copy and paste, but I'm going to make sure that I definitely send that out to everybody so that you've got some of that information. I'll also be sending out the link along with this video as well. So I'd just like to really express my thanks to all our speakers today who have taken the time to be with us. A huge thank you to Catherine, Sam, Jerry and Adam, who I think have given us an absolute wealth of experience and lots of case examples of the kind of work that they have done and continue to do. Lots of guidance and places where you can access further information through sort of Friends Against Scams and the information that I'm going to give you to send out as well. And I'd also like to say a big thank you to Sarah for her support with the IT side of things, and a really big thank you for all of you for registering and being here with us today. So I will get the information out to you, if not today then tomorrow, but please, if you can, we just ask that you share the message around debt crime and scamming, and to continue to make sure that the message is cascaded out across. So from myself and on behalf of everybody here today, I'd just like to say thank you for attending.